Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Hi, Howard. Nice to see you again. Same office, huh? We look forward to, so welcome. And today we're going to do the second session. This is the second session of the two-part session. And it will be continuing from our discussion yesterday on HR transformation and helping you think about, is there a business case, and if there is, how to build it, right? So I'm going to do a quick recap of what we saw yesterday in the first session, and we'll go from there. Okay. So we saw the 6 stages of how to think through a business case, right? A logic flow. We discussed the strategic context, and we did a brief analysis of the assets yesterday. And we also had a diagnostic tool, which we sent you a link for. And hopefully you've had, all of you have had a chance to look at that diagnostic and answer those questions and get your report back. And we will briefly discuss that. And should any of you have any questions, please feel free to let us know. We will move from there to the need for change, the review of possibilities, the blueprint for the to-be process, and then how to build the actual conclusion. Right? So as a quick reminder for everybody that took the analysis yesterday, you would have answered questions from here, and you would have got a report which allows you to understand if you are in the basic, intermediate, emerging, or best in class, and provided you fairly clear steps in terms of why it's placed in that category and the suggestions it can make in how you can move forward from whichever step you are to the next level. Okay? So that was a quick overview of what we saw yesterday. And with that, I will hand it off to Howard to walk us through the need for change. Howard?
Thanks, Guhan. Hi, everybody. Pleasure to be here with you again. Okay, the need for change. I think I mentioned yesterday, this is follows from the as-is analysis. Let's just take a quick look at our as-is analysis from yesterday. Sorry, yeah, as I said yesterday, the need for change is not the future solution. It's the parameters, the specification for the future solution, yeah? It sets, yeah, the framework for what any possible future solution should fall within. Okay, so yeah, we saw these 2 examples of as-is analyses, parts of as-is analyses yesterday. And just to reiterate, these are from 2 different business case projects. That's why they look different. And also, each one is only a part of the as-is analysis from its relevant project, yeah? Because as I said yesterday, the as-is analysis will cover what you do, why you do it, how you do it in terms of process, technology, people, organization, physical infrastructure, commercial environment. It'll cover how much key volumetrics, how many key volumetrics. It'll cover how well, quality metrics if they exist, and it'll also cover how much the cost base. So each of these from a different business case study and only one part of a wider as-is analysis. Okay, just caveating that a little bit. Now, we got a question yesterday that I noticed. I was just looking at this before we came live, and the question was, is cost per payslip a good way of building or maybe ascertaining whether there's a business case? Guhan, maybe you could find the exact language of that question for me while I'm speaking, yeah? And the diagram on the left, as I said yesterday, is a simple cost per payslip, country by country. So each of those blue dots is a different country within an organization that's got about 40 countries. And you can see the wide variation. So a couple of things. Cost per payslip, yes. Cost per payslip by your own countries is, of course, a key input into any thinking about a business case for global payroll. So maybe there's something behind the question that I don't understand, but it's certainly not the only input, but yes, it's a key input, yeah? And it could be said that But different countries have different legislative environments. Payroll is very much more complicated in some countries than others. Yes, let's take that into account. We have to interpret the data. First, we get the facts. And to get these facts, we had to build a template. We had to identify what goes into fully loaded payroll, the cost of the payroll people, the cost of the TNA people, the systems, training, recruitment, stuff like that. A typical fully loaded cost, yeah? Now we had to build a template and we had to send it out to all the countries and we had to coach the people in the countries and support them and chase them to get the data. So we got the facts. And once we get the facts, we can interpret them in many ways. And again, as I said yesterday, we do more subtle and sophisticated interpretation, mapping cost per payroll against what we know as standard costs from external benchmarking in each of those countries, mapping it against the size of the country business units, and mapping it against whether payroll's fully outsourced or partially outsourced or not outsourced at all in those countries. Okay, so I hope I picked up that question.
Absolutely. Howard, absolutely. The exact verbiage on the question is the cost per payslip a good measure to check the payroll business case globally? So I think the cost per payslip is an important indicator if you're building a payroll business case. So that is bang on. Okay, and like I said, not the only measure. So you need to think about it holistically. So, yeah.
Okay, so now we've got a picture of what an as-is, or we've refreshed our minds of what an as-is analysis might look like. Yeah, rapid but robust, not too much, but not too little, just right, like Goldilocks. The next stage is need for change. So let's take a look at a need for change. This again is from a different business case project. If you can just press page down, Guhan, a couple of times, I believe. Yeah. Oh. 4 blue blobs. Wow. Let's take a look at these 4 blue blobs. I remember it very well. The HR team was led by a very tough lady when I was facilitating this business case feasibility study. These 4 blue blobs are pretty powerful. They wanted a solution after thinking through the strategic context and analyzing their as-is, taking a critical look at themselves. They said to themselves and decided, we need a solution that gets rid of this payroll risk. Yeah, deal with it. We need a solution that gets the basics right first time, every time. This means transactional services to their customers, employees and managers. We need a solution that gets the costs down at least 20%. All the functions in that organization, the support functions, were under pressure to reduce costs. And we need a solution to get us focused on business priorities. So that's pretty powerful stuff encapsulated in 4 blue blobs. Okay, yeah, that's the need for change. Let's push on then into the next stage. Once you know the need for change, you can review the possibilities, trends, developments, best practices. Who's doing what, what's out there? Well, out there for a long time has been shared services, outsourcing, offshoring, scanning, OCR. Out there for some less time has been robotic process automation. Now is emerging AI. So I'm going to hand over to Guhan, who works for a supplier, of course, Neeyamo. And a little aside here, a little lesson learned, and we'll come back to this a bit later. Suppliers know more than consultants do, because they do it for a living, yeah? So if you get a consultant, I think I mentioned this yesterday, who wants to be a gatekeeper to protect you from the suppliers, just be a little careful, because suppliers do it every day and they know what works and they know what doesn't work. So if you can interact with them in a friendly and non-committal environment, that's a very rich source of ideas. If you can manage and facilitate that process. You don't want any sales in there, of course. At the same time, they don't want you to steal their intellectual property, yeah? But if it can be managed, and it can, because I've done it many times, it's a really rich environment, because suppliers know what they're talking about more than management consultants do in these things. Anyway, over to Guhan.
Thank you, Howard. No pressure there, huh? Having lived on the supply side for a while now, Howard, I think the learning from a customer environment in terms of what works best for them is really what facilitates finding the right solution for them. Right? There are a number of different opportunities that exist, and we'll talk through a few options. And like Howard said, it doesn't have to be complicated, right? It doesn't have to be rocket science. It doesn't have to be a fancy four-stage chart with six things. In fact, if you just look around, a lot of options um, are right in front of you. And sometimes just because it's simple, people think that, no, it's too simple. Why would I even do something like that? If it's so obvious, then why hasn't anybody else done it before? Probably the secret is they all are doing it. And we'll walk you through a few things that you can think about very practically, right? Um, and we'll look at three things. The first one is HR operations, right? If you look around, look at the low-hanging fruit first, right? So in any organization, the HR operations are usually the most ripe in terms of what we can do to improve them and therefore help build an appropriate business case. Now, this does not automatically mean pick up everything and send it off somewhere else. Right? Look at your existing options first. So if your organization already has a shared service center of some sort, in one of our customer engagements, when we took a closer look and we started studying their HR costs and where some of their spend is going, we found that the amount of money that they're spending for recruitment, right, is non-trivial. Right? So, and when I say recruitment, I'm talking about your talent acquisition team working with headhunters or with talent agencies and things like that, right? So each of them have charges in that process, and therefore there is a larger cost involved in the overall cost of that hire. Now, if you can think about how you can leverage your TA team to use more internal resources, right? So maybe you expand the talent acquisition team a little bit, but you can significantly reduce the external spend, because the external spend is usually a percentage of who you hire, right? So if you can think just about that, there can be a pretty significant saving in terms of the money that is going there, right? So, and that's a very low hanging fruit to sort of think about, right? So if you strengthen the talent acquisition team, so perhaps if you can leverage a shared service center, or you have people located in different parts of the world, if you have hiring requirements around the world, then if you just think about that function, you can save significantly. And where there are simple processes, right? You have a number of different opportunities to automate. Something as simple as an HR help desk, right? Can help centralize all your incoming queries into a single place and offer you a very rich source of analytics around the questions that are coming. And if they can create more self-service around it, then in our book, the best HR ticket is not the one you answer, but it's the one you prevent, right? The best ticket is the one that you don't even have to answer. So if you can create those possibilities, then you are setting yourself to succeed in a very different way, right? And this is not massively strategic, or it's not hugely, consult kinds. These are regular day-to-day things that you can think about, offering more self-service options that your people can get used to, right? So if you have an existing HRIS, or if you don't, if you have an existing HRIS, use that to get that as a starting point, or you can look at a regular simple help desk tool to be able to help you. And another area for automation that is really ripe, and a lot of HR time is spent, is in letter generation, believe it or not. Employees around the world need letters for so many different things, right? They need an employment letter, or they need a certificate, or so many different things, whether it's for a business, it's for a bank loan, or for a document. If you have a tool that can help automate that letter generation, then you're saving massive amounts of time. And more importantly, you're preventing an employee query coming in, asking you that, and then you giving the document and then tracking SLA, right? Um, why do something if it can be avoided in the first place? So it's not just about optimizing processes, it's also thinking about eliminating them in the first place. And these are reasonably low-hanging options that you're probably dealing with on a daily basis. Now, when you think about your payroll, the easiest approach is to be able to outsource your payroll. Unless you're a payroll services company, this is not a core competency for you. And you are running a business, and you want to make sure that your employees in whichever part of the world they're in are paid right and your compliances are taken care of. You should definitely evaluate options for using a global provider. And the business case on this, especially if you are a multinational organization, is pretty substantial. Not just, and like Howard said, it's not just in terms of, hey, the payslip cost X, but if you think about the cost of payroll, when you look at the cost of a payslip, right, let's say it's X, your overall cost of payroll is about 8X. If you include the amount of time people are taking to provide information, to check it, to validate it, to verify the outputs and so on, it's about 8X. And if you can find a way to think about how you can solve for that 8X rather than just that X, it makes a material difference in the overall outcome from a business case perspective. Again, this is straight in front of you. This is something that you can definitely consider. Now, the big question, when you have processes like comp and ben, and I'll tell you why I picked comp and ben as the third one. Right now, just before I get to comp and ben, if you look at the sequence, your HR operations is something that happens daily, right? So several times daily almost. Right? So there's a huge frequency for HR operations. Payroll happens at a predefined frequency, whatever that frequency is, monthly, weekly, bi-weekly, and so on and so forth. Right? Now, comp and ben typically is a process that happens annually or semi-annually. Right? Now, most people look at it to say, should we find a tool to automate the comp and ben process? Certainly. Right? But to be looked at in context, there are a number of very efficient tools available in the marketplace that you can look at that help you build a planner and a merit increase process and automate a lot of the drudgery around collecting that information from managers and putting it together and mapping it to performance scores and so on. But remember, that's happening once a year, right? And if you think about that in context, the effort and cost involved in that versus things that you do every day, every 2 weeks, every month, it's a different proposition. Right? And the problems that are done or the problems that you have once a year, it is better to think about better technology for them rather than just finding a way to outsource them or just ship it off somewhere else, right? So I think that when you look at what is in front of you, there are some obvious steps that you can take in terms of how you can think about it. And when you look at any of your processes, more than just what the process costs or the effort, think about a couple of other things. What is the frequency of that? And what is the employee impact for that? Right? And that will give you a much better sense for the art of the possible than any other sort of strategic 50-page deck around numbers and charts will ever give you. Right? And as Howard said, this is a business that we live in. We understand this natively because we're providing this for a lot of our customers. And sometimes simple is always better than complicated. But remember, it's not easy. So picking an option in any of these may be simple, but you need to think through in your context, how are you going to make it work? And therefore, you need to look at the overall possibilities and pick them carefully. All right. So those are some of the approaches that you can think about from a practical day-to-day perspective. I will hand it back to Howard to walk us through the blueprint.
Yeah, thanks, Guhan. And I've just been looking at some of the questions that are coming in. They're very interesting. So we really should set ourselves time to answer these questions and the ones that we didn't get from yesterday as well. Yeah, simple versus difficult. Difficulty versus simplicity. You could make a 2x2 matrix. Yeah, and most Transformation is conceptually simple, but difficult to achieve. Yeah, I could go through the other 3 parts of the matrix, but we haven't got time. So fully agree with you there, Guhan. Okay, the blueprint for the 2B. Now we're ready to start thinking about how the world could be, because we've set the need for change. We've reviewed the possibilities. We know what's out there, yeah? So if you just press page down for me one time, Guhan, thank you. It comes really in 3 parts, in my view. We've got to create a blueprint for the way things will work. I call that the operational model or the operational solution in the future. How would things work? And also, what would the commercial model be? Who would be responsible for what? Would we outsource? Would we do it ourselves? Would we get buy consultants to help us, etc., etc.? And then the implementation approach. How would we get from here, the as is, to the 2B? So let's take a look at a quick checklist that I often use in these business case studies. And sometimes there's different sub-bullets, but these are the main ones. So I'm going to skip over business units served. I'll pull out a couple of them. I want to come back to the first one on the list on the left, business units served. I'm going to come back to that. Services provided. Well, we already said in the analysis of the as is, what do we do now and why do we do it? And we all know that HR and payroll departments do some services that add hardly any value and don't do some that could add value. Case in point, HR business partners who still accept walk-ins from employees to ask them mundane questions. It might still be happening out there. I was in the USA last year fixing a broken payroll and HR operations setup, which was partially outsourced. The outsourcer had already got a help desk, but there was a queue of people to go and ask mundane questions to the retained payroll organization. Not their job, yeah, but they're still providing that service. Unofficially in that case, yeah, but they're still providing that service. Anyway, that's the services provided. Process principles, let me touch on that one, and the next one, systems environment. Are we going to go with an as-is process? So we lift and shift it to a shared services center or an outsourcer? Or are we going to re-engineer the processes or continuously improve them? If we re-engineer them, do they come out of a box with the technology that links to the next one? And we try and roll them out on what we call a fit gap basis, pushing them into the business units and only accepting variations when they're absolutely legitimate. So that's what I mean by process principles. I touched on systems environment as well. And I'll leave the others for interest of time. Let's move over to, I am going to come back to business units served as I promised. Moving over to commercial. Yes, do we do it ourselves? This is sourcing. Do we do it ourselves or do we outsource it? What would the commercial environment be? That applies even if we're doing it ourselves internally, yeah? What commercial environment would we set up if there's going to be an internal business services unit between the business services unit and the business units? Both in terms of money and in terms of customer service. Okay, I'll skip the others in that list. Going down to the bottom, yeah, the sequence of sourcing versus transformation. This is a key one, isn't it? If we're going to outsource, do we transform first, then outsource? Or do we outsource, lift and shift, then transform, or we do both together? Yeah, so there's 3. There's about 4 or 5 or 6 different permutations and combinations for that question, yeah? What would the timeline be? What would the project management regime? We'll talk a bit about timelines a little later in this presentation where we look at the possible timeline for a business case project and how that would fit in with the overall route map of a transformation program. Okay, as promised, back to business unit served. Advert for Neeyamo. I don't get paid for this, by the way, but in a lot of large multi-business unit or multi-country HR transformations, we get it. So if you just imagine the diagram of the payroll costs across the 40 businesses of that organization, country-based businesses, yeah? So they had 40. And some are much smaller than others, much smaller. And the client says, as part of its need for change, we want global standardization. We want to act like a true bona fide multinational. We want to do things the same way, wherever possible, around the world. And then they start speaking to either a consultant or a BPO supplier. And pretty soon, somebody's initiated the idea, often comes from suppliers. Let's not bother with the little countries. Let's do the Pareto analysis, and we only take the top 5 or 6 big countries, yeah, or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10. But let's not bother about the African countries; they're very small, yeah. Or country here, or Colombia or Ecuador. We've only got 2 people in Ecuador. So what happened to the global model? Now, I'm not saying it's easy, but you even want a global model, or you don't. Okay, and often this comes from suppliers, and the advert for Neeyamo, in case you're wondering why I said that, was the long tail outsourcing. Exactly spotted this a number of years ago and said, we'll pick up that long tail. But like I say, this is not an advert for Neeyamo. But watch out for suppliers or consultants who say, yeah, we can help you with that global model. And within 5 minutes, they're talking, let's not worry about the smaller countries. It's a very regular issue. Okay, if we press on. We're ready for the conclusions. Now, as I said before, yesterday, this 6-step process can be done in an hour in your head, or it can be done in a 1-day workshop with your colleagues. And this is how ideas start to develop, yeah? Or it can be done in a project. A more formal project. Yes, and here we are at conclusions, that you might come to a conclusion after half an hour of thinking through this, or after a day's workshop, or after a 12-week program. We're now at conclusions. We're ready, yeah, to compare the as is with the to be in the light of the need for change. So we're going to come up with a clear recommendation. And as I've said all the way through this, right from that red and green diagram at the start, it's financial and non-financial, it's qualitative and it's quantitative. Those two aren't the same thing, actually, but I'm not going to go into the details. You could have a quantitative quality measure that wouldn't be financial, yeah? We will recruit within 6 weeks. So that's quantitative, but it's not financial. So those two domains are not exactly the same, but it needs to be holistic. Another angle, it needs to be holistic, yes, built on facts, but then with the interpretations that we talked about a couple of times. And finally, again, as I said yesterday, including opinions of people who want to make this happen. And that's one of the ways, not the only way. There was a question yesterday, how do we overcome resistance from the C-suite to HR transformation? This is not the only way. We covered some ways yesterday. Yes, you need a business case, and that's what these 2 sessions are about, yeah? You need to put the effort into a business case. Another way is you need to lead, influence, opinions, stand up. And I'm sure that the person who asked that question is already doing this, yeah, but it's a key part of the equation. And there's one other part of the equation that I'll come to answer that question in just a couple of slides, in the next slide, I think. Okay, so opinions are totally bona fide. People have opinions. Business is about psychology, sociology, as much as it's about numbers and reason. So if you just press page down for us, Guhan. Yes, and again, please. Okay, so your conclusions will include a financial model. There's no getting away from it. Those HR people not wishing to stereotype, they don't fancy numbers as much as finance people do. You might need a finance person on your team. This isn't an example, by the way. It's just a simple stylized financial model. The first line is your current cost projected over the next 7 years. So that adds to 70. The next line is what the to-be world would cost. Less, 38. But we have this bad thing that will happen called investment, yeah, and that adds up to 10 in this case. Just before we went live, I spotted a little mistake in this, and that is, and it's a mistake that outsourcers used to make all the time, and clients. And you see the to-be line, it keeps dropping year after year, 6, 5, 4. That's great. but there's no investment on the investment line. So I should have put a 1 or a couple of 1s to drive that, that improvement. And the perennial problem that used to happen in lift and shift outsourcing deals was that, yeah, we'll make a X% saving to basically through less heads and more economical heads by offshoring it, yeah? Lift and shift, we'll use less people and we'll use cheaper people, for want of a better phrase. And then after that, we'll continue to drive down the costs. It was after that, we'll continue to drive down the costs, didn't have any backing behind it. It didn't have any investment in the business case, but more to the point, there was never any explanation other than some vague continuous improvement. So I've made my own mistake here. I should have put another couple of 1s in year 4 and maybe year 5 in the investment line. Anyway, you will need a financial model. Won't go into any more depth except to say, if you look at this savings line, the cumulative savings line, this client is cash negative in year 1, year 2, and what they call breaks even in year 3. So payback is in year 3, and payback is one of the investment appraisal criteria that most companies use. It's not the only one, but I won't go into the others here. We've been saying all the way through this, things should be holistic. So just as important as the financial model, and I also mentioned a phrase of mine yesterday, the financial model and the business case are not synonyms. Watch out for anybody who uses them as synonyms. Yeah, the financial model has to be a key part of any business case, but it's not the whole business case. Equally important are the other qualitative areas, and here are a few examples. So for this particular client, they were going to get from their proposed, no, that's fine, Guhan, you can bring that equation in, thanks very much. That's the equation, if you remember from yesterday. So this particular client on the right there, they were going to get significant cost savings into, oh, I don't have to read this, yeah. So they're going to get some benefits, but they had some reds as well, you know, downsides and risks. Cash out possibly could be amortized. Loss of control, or maybe gain control through SLAs, because we don't have measures at the moment. We certainly don't have SLAs between HR and the business. Okay, potential for resistance, need effective change management. I noticed a question from the corner of my eye about change management. We'll pick that up, yeah, I promise. Okay, so there we have the conclusions. Is there a business case? I don't know. The business case depends on the journey, depends on the client's circumstances, as we've gone through. Somebody mentioned a question yesterday that said something about the reds, and I haven't got it in front of me. And at first I thought, how do you balance all these greens and reds? But that's not the question, but I'll answer that question as well. You don't. There is, theoretically, you could make them all a dollar value. You could make everything a dollar value. If we remove the risk of payroll falling over because everybody's leaving, how much would that save us? But this is fantasy. So ultimately, we're in a kind of a barter situation. I have 24 tomatoes, you have 16 bananas. We can't resolve them all into apples. So we're going to have to use common sense and psychology as well. But I don't think that was the question, actually. I think the question was more about, have you got it in front of you, Guhan?
Yes, I do, Howard. I think the question was how to measure and match risk in the green and the red box. So if there is a downside from a cost perspective or a risk, how do you mix and match them?
Okay.
How do you the downside and risk in all of these items?
Okay, well, as just repeating yesterday, as I'm sure we know, but for just in case, the risk on the green is removal of risks in the as-is situation. So that's a benefit because risk will be removed. The risk on the red is new risks that emerge as a result of us transforming. Yeah, how do we measure risks on either side? Well, the overall reds versus greens is the conclusions of the business case, but how we measure risk on either side, we sit in a workshop with our colleagues and stakeholders, and we identify risks, and then we describe them, and then we categorize them. Now, some people would have it, I've seen reams of definition on how you classify risks and their seriousness and their likelihood and the impact they will have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 scales. This times that equals that. I'm about people. A team of people can judge the risks and mark them as red, green, or amber, or in my system, blue if they resolve, fully resolved. But basically, if it's a risk, it's red, green, or amber. Let's identify them together with the relevant stakeholders. Let's list them. Let's describe them, and let's assess them using our opinions. That's how I would do it. Okay, so now we want to talk a little bit about a business case, a typical business case project, and then how it fits into an overall route map for transformation. Not too much on this, but at some stage, you're going to need to formalize your thinking about business cases. I see another question in the corner of my eye says, what are the top 3 problems or the top 3 barriers? I think there's a couple of questions around that. One is not having a compelling business case. So we can come back to that and answer this question, do it the full justice, yeah? But without question, I'm going to vote for not having a business case. And I've seen quite large scale transformations that don't have an adequate business case. But we'll come back to that, yeah? So you're going to have to sit down and do the stuff because quite big decisions depend on it. You're going in the next phase, as we'll see in a minute or two, you're going to go into a situation where you expend more energy, at least, and more time, if not more money. Yeah, more time is money. So this is kind of semi-formal. You have a team. It needs to have clear roles and the right representation, somebody for process, somebody for technology. So you might need somebody from IT, or maybe that's an HR IT person, somebody for the financial modeling, etc. Somebody who knows can guide the process. You need a steering committee with the relevant stakeholders there to oversee, but you're also building sponsorship with them, which is another aspect of the question, how do you get over resistance from C-suite? But I promised a third one, and I've not touched on that yet. It is on this slide, and I'll come to it in a second. And you need some kind of formal output, a Word document or a PowerPoint document. I won't go into too much detail, but when I say PowerPoint document, I don't mean a PowerPoint for a presentation with bits of bullet points with no syntax or grammar. I mean a PowerPoint a document that's set up to be read. And they're great actually because they digitize subjects. Each slide is one subject, like the as-is analysis, people, process, technology, organization. And each bullet point has grammar and syntax. Of course, you can drop graphics in as well. And that makes it a PowerPoint document, but for reading. That's my favorite output, but other organizations like Word or they might have their own formats. Data collection, 4 weeks, plus another 2 to analyze it. Well, actually not another 2, it overlaps. But that's 6, 1, 2, that's 5 weeks of data collection, yeah? You're gonna have to get some facts. Review of possibilities, a couple of weeks, maybe interacting with suppliers. I once got 10 different suppliers in the room and managed to control them all. There wasn't a single sales message. It was just honest swapping of ideas. That was a bit extreme, actually. I don't usually do that. But as I said before, I'll usually interact with a couple of suppliers, get my client to interact with a couple of suppliers so they can see how things really are on the ground. A couple of weeks for the blueprint, conclusions, and then decision-making by the steering committee, a clear recommendation for go or no go for the next stage, which we'll come to in a couple of minutes. Here, as promised, is the third way for getting over resistance from a C-suite. Actually, let's go to the next slide, Guhan, and I'll keeping everybody in suspense. Let's go to the next slide and open everything if you wouldn't mind. The last one is operations. Thanks. This is a typical route map for a transformation. The first 12 weeks, it's much easier to get the C-suite to influence the C-suite to say, yeah, okay, do a project. Let's find out. It's much easier to influence the C-suite to invest in a 12-week formal project, which they're going to review the outputs on and decide upon, using all the other good stuff that we said before about opinions and influence and whatever, and then come out with a formal output that follows this logic flow. Yeah. So it's much easier to get them to say yes to a 12-week, an investigation, a feasibility study, than it is to get them to say yes to the whole kit and caboodle. It's going to last the next 2 years and cost X million. So that was my third idea for how to overcome resistance from the C-suite. Actually, there's a fourth one that just struck me. If the C-suite kind of is cryptic terminology for the finance director, you need a financial model. I said that before, and that just struck me as a fourth idea for getting over resistance, because it's usually the CFO, isn't it? Let's face it. But you need a financial model. Anyway, let's just spin quickly through this this route map in case it's of help to people. So the business case project, about 12 weeks normally, depends on people's availability. You could do it much less. I've done it in 4 weeks, but it usually takes about 12 weeks from soup to nuts. Then you go into a procurement phase of one shape or another. If it's outsourcing, you'll be reaching out to outsourcing suppliers. If it's a new technology implementation, to technology suppliers. Either way, you might also be reaching out to consultants, yeah? And then when you've got your chosen partners on board, you can do a detailed design. And you see the business case carries on in lighter green. That's because as you're doing your detailed solution design, you're fleshing out the business case. And these are therefore gateways. So it's only after detailed solution design, and that's been fed back into the business case to revalidate it, that you press the button on the real thing, which is implementation that leads to operations. So there's a number of gateways here. And then of course there's implementation, and things start to go live, operations. The implementation in this case seems to include the transformation. Sometimes transformation is a different line that happens before or after, as I said earlier on. But here I've rolled the transformation into the implementation. One last point to think about the business case. I've shown it going on until the end of detailed design, and indeed it does, as an evaluation tool. However, it exists after that, but in a different guise. It exists as a key change management tool. When it's finished, it exists as a key change management tool during implementation. So a question about change management. The business case, if it's compelling, succinct, whatever other words we want to say, clear and compelling, yeah, can be a fantastic change management device. And then when operations kicks in, or perhaps when operations is fully up and running after the end of the implementation phase, the business case morphs again. It morphs into your key or a key benefits realization mechanism. Tracking whether what you wanted to do at the outset, you're actually achieving. So the business case morphs over time, and the dark and the light green only show its evaluation guise. It then becomes a tool for justification to other stakeholders, change management, and then eventually to benefits realization. I think that's all I want to say. And then therefore I'm going to hand back to Guhan. And the good news is we've got a few minutes to answer questions.
Absolutely, Howard. I think this is very, very helpful. But I see some really interesting questions, right? So to quickly summarize, these were the 6 steps that we looked at: the strategic context, looking at your as-is, identifying the need for change, building the possibilities, a blueprint, and then how to think about the conclusions, right? So while these are the 6 steps, we went through each of them in detail to sort of help you think through and provide examples as well. Okay, so that's from a session sort of content perspective that we wanted to share with you. But I think just looking at the number of questions and the number of outputs that questions are getting, Howard, I think one of the first questions, perhaps we'll get into that and not just wait for the. We'll take what we can in the time that we have. So one of the questions that got a lot of upvotes is, what are the metrics you suggest for measuring the success or failure of an HR transformation journey?
Whatever metrics you set in the need for change. I'm going to try and be quite succinct in these answers. So, but I don't want to appear flippant at all. But yeah, whatever metrics are important to you that flow out of the need for change. Yeah. So if it's cost saving, measure how much costs you've saved. If it's more focus on high value activities, start to measure what the business thinks about its business HR business partners, for example. And the business case, as we said, is a key benefits realization device.
And I think that if you use the business case, right, or this entire approach sort of as a guidepost for what you want it to be, then that itself becomes, it lends itself to a very nice set of metrics that you're measuring, right, as you go along that journey. So don't think of this as a one-time exercise, one and done, right? It's a living document. You've built it, and it's to help you at 7 years, 5 years is a long time, right? So you built the business case, and then when you start thinking about it, like Howard said, you can start iterating it, right? What went well, and then adjusting it as you go along. It's not one and done. That's never usually how it works. Okay.
Let me pick Guhan. Let me pick a quick question off here. Is it realistic to finalize the procurement process within 12 weeks? Could you just go back to the previous slide, and we'll do this really quickly. Sorry, Guhan. Yeah. No, we're not finalising the procurement process in 12 weeks. We're simply ascertaining whether there's a prima facie business case that's solid enough for us to press the button on the next phase, which is procurement. In detailed design, depending on the shape of the program, we'd finalize the procurement process, or even you could say in implementation. It depends. Yeah, we might be making localization tweaks during implementation, but the 12 weeks is only for the business case. And for that, we don't need the detailed to-be procurement process, nor the detailed as-is process, as I said before. So hopefully we cracked that one. Guhan, back to you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the entire emphasis that we were talking about is in this first 12 weeks, putting the thought process together. The rest of the implementation will be based on the dynamics of what works for your organization, right? Okay, so the next question that got a lot of upvotes, in your opinion, where do most HR departments go wrong with their transformation initiatives?
Okay, I wasn't being rude earlier on when I was scribbling. I was scribbling the answer to this question. And I would say three things. Heartfelt, a lack of a robust business case. Yeah, that's number one. A tune on this is a hidden business case, because even if it's robust, sometimes it's not robust, by the way, but people press ahead anyway. And by the way, they waste a lot of time for themselves sometimes and for the suppliers, because they go through a procurement process and then say, oh, we've changed our minds. Yeah, so everybody's wasted time. But lack of a robust business case, or a hidden business case, in that it's not really shared as a change management tool. It's kept as a secret, especially cost savings in HR transformation. Sometimes it's presented as we're doing this to get better focus on high value activities or whatever. It will be better for the business to have self-service. It might be, but no business ever voted for self-service, by the way. No line manager ever voted to do his or her own HR tasks through self-service, but whatever. Yeah, but the cost saving is pushed downwards, as if people are too immature to be able to handle that. This is bad change management, really. So the mysterious case of the disappearing cost-saving business case. So first one, sorry, I'm rambling. Lack of proper business case. Second one, poor implementation, poor program management, or poor change management. Again, change management comes up, or a poor methodology. Sometimes you need a methodology like fit gap. When you've done a global design and you're rolling this process technology into multiple business units, you better be ready for resistance, and you better have a strong governance process and strong facilitators who can spot genuine exceptions, put them up for review and approval, but push down. We're different in this country. We couldn't possibly do it like that. We have to do it our own way, yeah, because you're going to get a lot of that. So you need a strong and clear methodology with clear leadership. So my first one was robust business, lack of business case in one sense or another. The second one was poor implementation. My third one, okay, let's just wrong supplier or the wrong contract, the wrong commercial environment. Yeah. So you either choose the wrong supplier, whether that's a consultant or an outsourcer, or it might be the right supplier, but you've got the wrong contract. And that's in my experience, my top three anyway.
I think that is a brilliant top three, Howard. The only item that I would add to that is, in addition to change management, when you are driving an HR initiative of this nature, I think it is best to go in informed that you will have resistance. Right? Change is hard for anybody and everybody, and you're trying to tell the business to basically help themselves. Right? You can expect definite pushback on that. And in a multinational, multi-country environment where there are some businesses that are pretty powerful, right? They're almost feudalistic in nature. They've got their own business, they're profitable in their country, and they've got a case for having their own HR. And suddenly you're taking all of that away and centralizing it. You should walk in expecting noise. And don't be surprised when you hear that, or don't get worried, because that is part of how this is going to be managed. And therefore, I think one of the big things is that HR expects that this will be somehow a sleeper transition everywhere. It will be a sleeper transition if planned well in quite a few places, but expect noise in others. Okay. Excellent.
Let me make one more comment and answer the change management question as well, Guhan, if we can. Maybe you could look at what that change management question actually is. It's off my screen now. But building on your earlier point about simple but difficult, keep your change management simple. It's very rarely where people are going to clap in the HR transformation, the customers of it. So, I mean, let's not expect it. Let's set our objectives relatively low. Treat them like adults. This thing has to happen for these reasons. I'll give you one quick example. One company I was working with was presenting an outsourcing concept to people who would be materially affected by it. There were 40 slides, 36 of which is why this was a great idea for the company. We all know, everybody in the room had one main question: what does this mean for me? That wasn't even covered adequately in the draft of the presentation. Luckily, I soon changed that, yeah? Clear, mature, treat people like adults, and yeah, they're not, you know, most people who receive this or are affected by it, they're not going to be throwing ticker tape parades for it. Their lives will be better in the long term, and that keeps us going in HR. Sorry, Guhan, I took too much time there.
No worries. There was one interesting question, Howard, and I think that was part of what I said. Can you delve a little more into your statement that actual payroll cost equals 8 times the payslip cost? What elements constitute this? Essentially, when you look at the payslip, right, it is just one of the outputs in the payroll process, right? And if you think of the payroll process as a 3-stage, where you provide payroll inputs, you process, and then the outputs. Somebody's got to provide those inputs, and those inputs have to be collated, right? Your inputs are not coming from your payroll team, they're coming from your business. Your HR team is consolidating them and probably providing them to your payroll team. There is a cost associated with all of that, right? And if your systems are not fully integrated, simple things like a new hire, somebody's got to provide that information to payroll. Termination, somebody's got to provide that, right? So all of those costs quickly add up on the input side. And then on the output side, before it goes out, somebody's got to validate it, confirm it, ensure that that transaction is completed, and so on. So that's really where the 8x is really coming from. Okay. Thank you so much for everybody that has participated and asked all of these really smart questions. And as one of my professors in college used to say, we're just checking if you're paying attention. No. So I think it is an absolute pleasure. We look forward to you enjoying the rest of your day and hopefully see you in other sessions. Thank you, Howard. Thank you, everyone else.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.